Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
This was 2013. I know it's been a while, but I just discovered Reddit posting, so here it goes. My husband at the time was my boyfriend. He had a blind aunt named B. She had a very bright outlook on life and was trusting, but cross her and she would snap. B was very wealthy from her own merits. She earned a huge amount of money in her 76 years. Anyways, every week we would take Auntie B to lunch once or twice a week. I would learn about how she sees the world and ask her questions about how she does certain things, and she would always gladly answer. Well, B had a best friend who was a nurse, and B got sick from her diabetes. She went into hospice care. Hope I spelled it right. B appointed her friend as her nurse to live with her, and it seemed well till her credit cards would overdraft or she got random calls from creditors. Or the time she had no food but had a fridge full of Pepsi when B never drank anything but water. I was suspicious, but I was an outsider, so I didn't say anything at first till one day we brought Auntie B lunch. It was a tuna sandwich cut in half for her already, with some fries her favorite from her favorite place. At this point, she had 2 weeks left to live. I offered to cut the sandwich more so she could eat it in force, but her nurse took it to the kitchen instead. She brings it back out on a plate, not cut, but it's only one half of the sandwich, and it has a huge bite out of it. I tell my, at the time, boyfriend her sandwich has been bitten into, and he goes no way, but when he looked, B was already eating it. So I get up, take her sandwich, and go to the kitchen to question the nurse and see her eating the rest of B's food. So I get mad and question her, and she claims she thought it was for her. We previously offered to buy her some food, and she refused. She gets mad and throws the sandwich on the floor and walks out when she says, "I need to get B more tuna for her lunch tomorrow, bye." We tell my mother-in-law, who is a lawyer, and she checks B's bank accounts to find that this nurse stole $45,000 from her bank to furnish a new apartment she got, and bought new clothes and stuff. So we call the cops, and she gives back the credit card but proceeds to claim she did it because B told her she could, to which B comes out the house to say, "Which? I'm blind. I couldn't see you robbing me, but the kids said you ate my sandwich too, like a ducking monster, so I'm taking you off my will, and you're fired as my nurse and friend." B pressed charges, and the nurse lady went to jail. She still has to pay back the money to the inheritance holders, my husband and his brother. Morale of the story: don't steal from the blind and don't eat their food in front of people who can clearly see you do it. I am a nursing student and do my clinical placements at a public hospital in my area. I am 20 years old and admittedly have a baby face and look fairly young for my age. In my country, South Africa, we wear very obviously noticeable uniforms with epaulets, nursing watches, and badges. On one particular day, on an internal medicine rotation, I was going about my delegated duties: drip changes, medications, and patient assessments. When I got a new admission, it was an elderly lady. She was not confused and was well-spoken. As I introduced myself and welcomed her to the ward, she gave me the stank eye and ignored me. I collected the necessary documentation and equipment for an admission and went to start the admission process. I explained to her that I wanted to take her blood pressure, test her blood glucose and HB levels, have to weigh her and perform an urinalysis. She asked me how old I am. I replied with my age, and she lost it. She shouted at me that I was an imposter. I am only a child and that I am going to prison for treating patients while being a child. My superiors heard and came rushing in as this old lady was grabbing at my collar to grab my ID badge. After some explanation from my superiors and a half-hearted apology from the lady, did the lady finally accept that I did, in fact, work at the hospital. After a while, she warmed up to me and became the sweetest old lady ever. I read a story on here a month back about the person who drives a retired police interceptor. See, I also drive one too. Black and white with a push bar and the spotlight. But no emblems or anything, scratched up paint everywhere. I'm saving up to get it repaired, so I don't intend to appear like I'm law enforcement. One day, I'm sitting around in my car in the back of a parking lot of a business, out of sight and out of mind, munching on a Subway sandwich, minding my own business. I'm so enthralled in my sandwich when I hear a sharp rapping on my window. I look up mid-bite at an older lady who matches those "I want to talk to your manager memes" to AT. I roll down my window and ask how I can help her. "Crazy lady? Oh, you finally managed to come out here and make your presence known? I've been complaining to the police for weeks about the homeless who hang out in the area around our businesses. Look, there's one right there." Proceeds to point at a guy who is well away from anything, just sitting there doing nothing out of the way. Me, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, there's a mistake. I'm not a cop, this is just a retired cruiser. If you want me to go somewhere else, I don't mind." Me, "First of all, don't talk to me like that. I've been nothing but courteous to you and honest. I'm not a cop. I would suggest calling the non-emergency line for the local PD." So I promptly roll up my window, which is super tinted, and go back to eating my sandwich and turn the radio up. Next thing you know, a few minutes later, I get a few cops roll up with lights and sirens, surround my car, and tell me to get out of the car. I promptly comply. They search me, let me go, and start talking to me. They said they got a call that someone was impersonating an officer and was still parked here. An important thing to note is that I do monthly ride along with this PUT for a few years now, so I'm a little acquainted with most of the officers. Luckily, one of them who showed up as backup knew me, knew what I drove, and knew that it's not something I'd ever do, as I've shown them nothing but respect for my rides with them. Fast forward a few minutes, they talk to the homeless guy who confirms that I've done nothing but sit there and eat my sandwich in peace. They turn to the lady and start lecturing her on lying like that. How it could have turned into a dangerous situation for me. How she's trying up emergency resources on this. She doesn't like this and gets mouthy with the officer. "Cue some more, I pay your salary, I want a supervisor, etc." Supervisor comes down and is actually a sergeant I'm friends with who's been pushing me to test and join the PD. Really nice guy, really good at his job and de-escalating any situation. She starts shouting at him and ends up poking him in the chest with her fingers. He tells her to not ever do that again, that she's lucky she's not already arrested. She proceeds to tell him to get lost and shoves him. Next thing you know, she's in cuffs, slapped with a bunch of charges and crying in tears in the back of a patrol car. Sergeant walks up to me and tells me what happens and that the PD is going to press charges. Cue all of us laughing at the situation, and they leave. I walk up to the homeless guy who basically told them the truth about what happened. Ask him if he's hungry, to which he says yes. Buy him a sandwich from the Subway next door. He thanks me. I thank him and I continue on my way. This is basically what solidified the idea that I need to repaint my car. Now, just to get this out of the way, I know that the issue that spawned this was petty, but the way it was handled was definitely pro. When my father was younger, he moved around a lot. Because of this, he was always the new kid and got picked on almost every time until he learned he didn't have to take that nonsense anymore. This is one such case of how he would get revenge. Now, at the place my dad lived at the time, he had been there for longer than most places. He lived at that house for a few years. Some places he would only spend a couple months. He had a few friends. He knew his neighbors, they were all buddies. Now, this story involves when one of those neighbors moved away and a new, far worse neighbor took his place. You see, my dad's house was on a hill, but the bottom of the hill went into the neighbor's property. When winter came and it snowed, my father and his friends, including the neighbor's kids, would all go sledding down the hill and have a great time. The neighbor's kids got to go onto my grandparents' property to go down the hill, and my dad got to sled all the way down into theirs. No issues, until the old neighbor and his kids moved out and the new neighbor, henceforth referred to as Kevin, moved in. From day one, Kevin was a jerk. He would litter. He kicked the other neighbor's animals. He screamed at a sweet old lady who lived across the street for looking at him funny. Now, my dad didn't think much of it, but when winter came, he would learn how much he truly hated Kevin. When the first snow came, my dad and his friends went to go sled down the hill like they always did. They went down a few times, but then Kevin came out. He started screaming about how they were on his property and how they needed to get the hell off right now, or he would call the police on them for trespassing. Now, my dad has always been a pretty reasonable guy, so he understood that while this guy was a grade A jerk, it was still his land, and he could tell them to leave if he wanted to. Now, this meant he and his friends had to go slower down the hill so they could stop before crossing into his property, and that could have been the end of it. But no, Kevin, being Kevin, decided that he could send his kids out and tell them that they were free to go onto my grandfather's property and go down my dad's part of the hill. They were politely met with an all hell no from my dad and his friend. My dad then marched over to Kevin's house and politely explained to him that if he was willing to let my dad and his friends go down the hill, they would let Kevin's kids come up his side to sled as well. Kevin then started screaming profanities at my dad about how they needed to let his kids sled, but that they still couldn't sled. After getting chewed out for a solid 30 minutes, my dad and my uncle left, Kevin still screaming at them behind them. The revenge. Psychological warfare. Now, because my dad had known the previous neighbors, he knew the layout of the house pretty well. He knew that the gravel path in Kevin's backyard that led into the wooded areas behind both he and Kevin's home connected to his own gravel path in his own backyard. He also knew that Kevin's family recently had a brand new baby girl. By chatting up the wife, who was much nicer and more reasonable than Kevin, he learned a few key things. 1. The new baby was a very light sleeper and was a pain to get to sleep. 2. His wife took care of her during the day, so Kevin exclusively was responsible for taking care of her during the evening. While my dad was clearing his own driveway and path, he offered to Kevin's wife to clear not only Kevin's driveway but his gravel path as well. What he really cared about was clearing the gravel path. Kevin never cleared his in the winter, and my dad needed a way to get to the house without his footprints being seen. Now, all the steps were in place for my dad's master plan. He waited until the dead of night, then using the gravel path, snuck up to Kevin's home. Fortunately for my dad, the path then circled around the house, so he then walked up the path to where the baby's room was. He picked up handfuls of gravel and started chucking the little pieces one by one at the window. He did this until the baby woke up. When this kid woke up, she screamed like there was no tomorrow. It was so loud. Kevin came rushing in to get the baby back to sleep. He rocked the baby back to sleep while my dad patiently waited. After the baby went back to sleep and my dad knew that Kevin had gone back to bed, he repeated the process. Now keep in mind this was all during winter break, so my dad had slept through the day. He was not tired in the slightest. He brought a book with him. He kept up this process till about 4 in the morning. Anytime Kevin looked like he was getting suspicious, which wasn't often, Kevin was a dummy. He would just run into the woods and hide till he thought it was safe to come back and try again. He did this for that night and repeated it all week. My dad could see Kevin visibly getting more tired each and every day. However, my dad made a mistake. He got seen by Kevin. The next day, however, it was not my dad who Kevin went after, but my uncle. He attacked him in his sleep-deprived state, was arrested for assault, and while he didn't see jail time, he saw many fines and apparently lost his job. He never yelled at my dad for going down the hill again. This happened not recently, but around 4 months ago, I think. So I worked at McDonald's. I quit like a month after this happened. That's another story for another time. It was a normal day. We didn't have much business, so I was at the cashier, making small talk with my colleagues. I heard someone walking up to me, so I quickly finished and looked at the customer. Hey, hi, welcome to McDonald's. How can I help you today? Kevin, could we speak to the manager, please? Said it in a nice but edgy tone. Me, sure. May I ask why, please? Karen, no, get the manager. I was kind of confused and slightly offended, but oh well. I got the manager and they walked over to the entitled family. Manager, how can I help you? Karen, yes, hi. My son would like a job here, particularly being a cashier. He could take, Karen points at me, her job there. I suppose they're just to fill in because you are understaffed. Me, sorry ma'am, I work here, I said while trying to keep my cool. Karen, you do not. You are far too old. You look 25. Give my son the job. Manager, sorry, we are full of staff. There's a Hungry Jack's down the road. If you take an application there, he might be able to. Karen, no, he can work here. Can you give my son your uniform, please? You can leave. Me, lady, I work here, and I deserve to work here. Let me do my job. Kevin, don't speak to my wife like that. Manager, sorry, you guys have been really rude to the staff and clearly aren't here to buy anything. I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. Karen, do not speak to me like that. I want to speak to the owner. Manager, if you don't leave, We will call the police. Don't disrespect us or our staff." Karen kicked the counter, threw a salt shaker on the ground, and walked out, holding her son's wrist. Apparently, they tried coming back a few days later, but the same manager was on his shift, so he kicked them out. Also, I was 17, not 25.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.